All right, so buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving into something big. We're taking on your request, a document called a 2 trillion cut in the U.S. federal budget. And let me tell you, this thing is fascinating.
It's ambitious, to say the least. 2 trillion.
Huge, right?
Yeah.
That kind of cut could totally reshape the government's priorities, maybe even for years to come, don't you think? It's not just about numbers either.
Oh, absolutely. This is about choices, tough choices.
Exactly. What do we keep? What do we cut? Who's going to feel it the most? Can we even make these cuts fairly? And honestly, what would that even look like?
A $2 trillion cut.
Yeah,
That's going to take a lot more than just trimming around the edges. I mean, it's massive.
for sure.
This document we're looking at, it actually lays out a bunch of different strategies, kind of broken down into categories.
Okay, interesting. So where does it start? What's first on the chopping block, so to speak?
Well, it starts with what some folks might consider the most obvious target, I guess you could say.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's hear it.
Defense spending.
Ah, defense. Big budgets, always in the spotlight. So what does the document propose? Cutting back on troops, new weapon systems.
Well, one of the ideas it throws out there is actually closing down some military bases.
Really? Shutting down bases completely.
Yeah, the ones they consider underutilized. It's a pretty bold idea when you think about it.
It is. Imagine whole military bases just empty, like
Yeah.
ghost towns almost.
Well, it's not quite as simple as just slapping a closed sign on the gate and walking away.
Oh, right. There's got to be more to it than that.
Closing a base, it has a huge impact on the local economy, right? Jobs, businesses, even just the community overall.
Makes sense. And strategically, I mean, we can't just abandon every base that isn't bustling every day, right?
Definitely not. There are some strategic locations you just can't give up, no matter what.
So it's a balancing act, I guess.
It is definitely a balancing act, and closing bases is really only one piece of the puzzle.
What else? What other ideas does the document have about defense spending?
Well, it talks a lot about making the whole process of buying military equipment, like procurement, more efficient, streamlining it.
Ah, so cut down on the waste.
Exactly. And speaking of waste, there's a lot of talk about getting rid of redundant weapon systems. So, no more buying two different jets that basically do the same thing.
Yeah, I think most people would agree no one likes seeing their tax dollars wasted,
Yeah.
especially on things we don't even need. But even if we made all those changes in defense, we're still nowhere near $2 trillion, right?
No, we're close. That's why the document takes aim at another big spending area.
Oh boy, which one?
Healthcare spending.
Oh, here we go.
Specifically, Medicare and Medicaid.
Those are like the two words guaranteed to start a political debate anywhere.
You're not wrong. But those programs represent a huge chunk of the federal budget. So if we're talking about cuts, we got to talk about them.
Okay, fair enough. So how do they propose cutting back on Medicare and Medicaid? Less coverage? Higher premiums? What's the plan?
The document actually outlines a couple of main approaches. One is negotiating drug prices.
Oh, like getting the government to use its buying power to lower drug costs. That's been talked about for ages, hasn't it?
It has, but it's always controversial. Some people argue it hurt the pharmaceutical industry and make it harder for them to develop new drugs.
Makes sense. I mean, you need money to do research and development.
Exactly. But then on the other side, you have people saying, hey, look at other developed countries. They negotiate drug prices just fine and still get new medications. So it's really complicated.
For sure, it's not a simple issue. But what's the other approach they talk about? For Medicare and Medicaid, I mean.
It's adjusting who actually qualifies for these programs. Like, maybe means testing for Medicare.
Means testing. So, like, if you earn a certain amount of money, you might have to pay more for Medicare.
Or even maybe not qualify at all, depending on the specifics. The document throws out an example, what if, say, people making over $200,000 a year gradually phased out of Medicare.
Wow, that's a big change.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions about what Medicare is even supposed to be. Is it a universal program or is it something else?
Yeah, it's a big debate. We want to make sure these programs can last, but we also want to make sure everyone has access to health care.
Right. And any change to Medicare or Medicaid, it doesn't just affect the people in those programs. It affects hospitals, doctors, even the whole healthcare system.
Definitely. These aren't just theoretical discussions. This affects everyone. So we've talked about defense. We've talked about health care. I think I can guess what's coming next.
The big one. The one everyone's a little afraid to touch.
Social Security.
Yep, the third rail of American politics. Touch it and you get fried.
But we got to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
It's a huge part of the budget.
Exactly. And even this document, even though it's aiming for these massive cuts, it acknowledges that Social Security has got to be part of the conversation.
So how do they propose tackling that? I mean, no one wants to mess with people's retirement.
They talk about adjusting the formula for benefits, like we're all living longer now, right? But the retirement age hasn't really kept up.
True, true.
So one suggestion is to gradually raise the retirement age, maybe even link it to how long people are living on average.
I can already hear people who are planning to retire at 65 getting upset about that.
Oh, definitely going to be pushback. But you got to think, if people are living longer, they're collecting those benefits for longer too.
Yeah, that puts more strain on this system. Makes sense, I guess, even if it's not popular. But it's not just about working longer, is it? What else does the document suggest?
They talk about making benefits a little bit lower for people who earn more money during their working years.
Like a sliding scale.
Yeah.
The more you make, the less you get from Social Security.
Kind of, yeah. The idea is that folks who are better off might not need as much support from Social Security as those who rely on it more.
I see. But that brings up a whole other debate about fairness, right? How do you decide who's better off? It's not always so simple.
Definitely not. And the document, it doesn't pretend to have all the answers. It just raises the questions, makes us think about how to keep Social Security strong for the future.
So we've covered defense cuts, health care, and even touched the third rail of Social Security. We're really getting into the nitty-gritty here.
We are, and we're just getting started. There's a lot more this document dives into, even more creative and maybe controversial ideas for reaching that $2 trillion goal. So before we jump to the break, we were talking about some big potential cuts, right, to some pretty major programs. But this document, it doesn't just want to slash and burn everything.
Oh, really? What else is it looking at?
Well, it spends a good chunk of time talking about what it calls tax expenditures.
Tax expenditures. Okay, that's a new one for me. What in the world are those?
It does sound kind of mysterious, right? But really, it's just a fancy way of saying the government is spending money, but not in the way we usually think about spending.
Okay, I'm officially more confused.
Think of it this way. It's like hidden spending. Instead of directly handing out cash, the government is giving up potential money they could be collecting through taxes.
Ah, so it's like instead of spending $1, you're just not earning $1, but
Yeah.
it still has the same impact on the budget.
Exactly. And it's all done through things like tax breaks and deductions, all buried in that giant tax code.
Oh, so all those deductions and credits and loopholes we hear about, those are tax expenditures.
Yep, that's them. And this document, it's basically saying we could free up a lot of money if we reformed or got rid of some of those.
Interesting. So like what kind of tax breaks are they targeting? Give me an example.
One of the big ones they talk about is the mortgage interest deduction. You know how homeowners can deduct some of the interest they pay on their mortgages from their taxes?
Yeah, I think so. Isn't that something to help people afford to buy homes?
That's the idea, yeah. Encourage homeownership. But the document argues maybe it's not as necessary as it used to be, or maybe it's mostly benefiting people who are already pretty well off.
So they're saying maybe it's time to rethink that tax break.
Exactly. They're not saying get rid of it completely necessarily, but maybe cap it or phase it out. It could generate a lot of revenue.
I could see how that would be a tough sell, though, especially for people with those big mortgages. But it's not just homeowners they're looking at, right?
Nope. They talk about tax breaks for certain industries, too.
Oh, interesting. Like which ones?
One example is the oil and gas industry. They get a lot of subsidies and tax breaks,
Yeah, I've heard about that. So they're saying we should cut those back.
The document argues that it could help us bring in more money, and it could also, kind of nudge things towards cleaner energy sources.
I bet that's not going to be popular with the oil and gas folks. But I see the point. We got to think about where those tax dollars are going.
Right. And are they still going to the right places? Are they still serving the purpose they were supposed to?
Makes sense. So we've talked about cutting programs and rethinking these tax breaks, these tax expenditures. But is there anything in this document about bringing in more money, not just spending less, but actually earning more?
Yeah, actually there is. They know that even with all the cuts and reforms we've talked about, we're probably still going to need more revenue.
So we got to talk about taxes, the T word. No one's ever excited about that.
No, definitely not the most popular topic. But the document looks at a couple of main areas.
Okay, lay it on me. What are they?
First up, corporate tax reform. They talk about closing those loopholes that let some companies, kind of avoid paying their fair share.
I've heard about that, yeah. Companies moving their profits overseas, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And then they also propose this idea of a minimum effective tax rate for corporations.
Minimum tax rate. So, like, no matter what, every company has to pay at least a certain percentage of their profits in taxes.
That's the gist of it, yeah. Level the playing field, make sure everyone's chipping in.
Sounds good in theory, but I can already hear the arguments against it. Hurts businesses, makes them less competitive, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. There'll be pushback. But the people who support it, they say it's about fairness. Companies benefit from a lot of things, like infrastructure and educated workers.
So they should contribute to supporting those things.
Right. And they point out that a lot of other developed countries have higher corporate tax rates than we do, and they're doing just fine. It's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah, making sure businesses can succeed while also making sure everyone's contributing to the common good.
Exactly.
So that's corporate taxes. But what about individual income taxes? Are they proposing raising taxes for everyone?
Not exactly. They mainly focus on adjustments for people who earn a lot of money, you know? The top earners.
So like raise taxes for the wealthy.
Basically, yeah. Increase those top marginal tax rates.
I bet that'll be popular.
Yeah.
But I guess the argument is that folks who are earning the most can afford to contribute a little more.
That's the thinking, yeah. And they talk about how income inequality is a growing problem. The gap between the rich and everyone else is getting wider. So this is one way to address that.
Makes sense. But this document, it goes even further, right? I remember reading something about a tax on financial transactions.
Yeah, they explore that idea too. It's a pretty bold one, that's for sure. Imagine a tiny fee, just a tiny fraction of a percent, on every single trade of stocks, bonds, all that financial stuff.
A fee every time someone buys or sells a stock. Wouldn't that just make investing more expensive for everyone?
Well, that's one argument against it. But the people who like this idea, they say the fee would be so small, most people wouldn't even notice it.
Okay, but how would that bring in enough money?
Think about how many trades happen every single day, right? Millions and millions. Even a tiny fee on all those transactions, it adds up fast.
So volume over size. Interesting. But wouldn't that discourage people from investing?
Maybe a little, but the people who support this idea, they say it could actually be a good thing, Slow down all that high-frequency trading, all those computers making trades in fractions of a second.
I've heard that can be destabilizing, right?
Exactly. So it's like trying to curb risky behavior while also bringing in money for the government. Two birds with one stone.
I can already picture the debates this would spark. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Cutting spending, rethinking tax breaks, even raising taxes. It's kind of overwhelming. Where do we go from here? What else is in this document?
Well, we've been talking a lot about the big controversial stuff, but there's a whole section on something everyone can probably agree on.
And what's that?
Making the government more efficient. Less waste, more bang for our buck.
So we're back. And we just finished talking about some pretty heavy stuff, like really shaking up the tax code and, potentially even raising taxes. It kind of makes me wonder if there are any, less drastic ways to save money. You know what I mean?
Well, the good news is this document isn't all doom and gloom. It's not just about making these huge, sweeping changes.
Okay, phew, that's a relief.
They actually spend a good amount of time talking about something we can all get behind.
And that is?
Making the government run better.
So like cutting down on the waste.
Yeah.
Getting more bang for our buck.
Exactly.
I mean, who doesn't hate seeing their tax dollars wasted?
Right. And one of the biggest areas they highlight is fighting fraud.
Fraud. Like people cheating the system.
Exactly. Think about programs like Medicare and Medicaid, right?
Huge programs.
Billions of dollars are lost every year because of, people getting benefits they shouldn't be getting, or sometimes even outright fraud.
It's infuriating to think about all that money going to waste, especially when it's meant for people who really need it. But how do you even stop that?
Well, the document suggests that technology can play a big role here.
Oh, interesting.
Imagine using, fancy data analysis and AI to spot patterns and catch suspicious activity.
So like Big Brother is watching, but in a good way.
Exactly. It's about using data to outsmart the fraudsters. And it's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about making the whole system more efficient, less prone to errors.
So less paperwork, less human error, more money going where it's supposed to.
Exactly. And there are lots of other areas where they suggest we could streamline things. Procurement processes, HR, even just using cloud computing to save on IT costs.
So basically make the government run more like, a modern business.
Something like that, yeah. But let's be real, even if we had the most efficient government in the world, we'd still be facing this huge budget deficit.
True, true.
So this document goes a step further.
Where do they go from there?
They start talking about something they call growth-oriented policies.
Growth-oriented, so not just cutting back, but actually trying to grow the economy.
You got it. It's like, instead of just trying to shrink the pie, let's bake a bigger pie so there's more to go around.
I like that. But how do they propose we do that?
Two main areas they focus on are infrastructure and education.
Okay, infrastructure, I get that.
Yeah.
Better roads, bridges, public transportation, that kind of thing. Makes it easier for businesses to operate.
Exactly. And it creates jobs in the process.
But those projects take forever, don't they? Years and years to build a new highway or a bridge. How does that help us balance the budget now?
Well, you're right. Those are long-term investments. But the idea is, if we build that strong foundation, the economy will grow faster, and that will lead to more revenue down the road.
Okay, I can see that. And education, I'm guessing that's about having a more skilled workforce, people who can earn more and pay more taxes.
Exactly. It's about investing in people, giving everyone the chance to reach their potential.
I like that. It's not just about numbers, it's about people's lives.
Absolutely. But we also have to be honest about the challenges, right? Any attempt to really tackle the budget deficit is going to be tough. There will be pushback.
Yeah, for sure.
The document, it actually points out that cutting programs can have unintended consequences. Like, you cut funding for something, people lose jobs, and that can hurt the economy overall.
Right, right.
And then there are the programs like Social Security and Medicare, the ones we talked about earlier.
Super sensitive topics.
People rely on those benefits, and any attempt to change them is going to be met with a lot of resistance.
It's a reminder that we're not just talking about abstract numbers here, we're talking about real people.
And that's why it's so important to focus on fairness. This document stresses that any solution, especially something this big, has to be fair to everyone.
So not just slashing budgets for the sake of it, but really thinking about the impact on people's lives.
Exactly. Who benefits, who loses out? Are we creating a more just and equitable society? Those are the questions we need to ask.
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
It is, but that's what makes this document so valuable. It's not telling us what to do, it's giving us the information we need to have those tough conversations, you know?
To make those choices as a society.
Good.
This deep dive, I've got to say, it's been a real eye-opener. We've gone from closing military bases to rethinking taxes to fighting fraud with AI. It's a wild ride.
It is. And there's no easy answer, no magic bullet. But at the end of the day, it's up to all of us as citizens to decide what we want the future to look like.
Well said. So to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and most importantly, keep talking about these issues.
The future of our country depends on it. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.